getting the short end of the stick as far as climate justice is concerned. But how is it affecting also security? The issue of climate security will be our discussion also with our panelists this morning, and looking also at a raft of other issues around the whole of Africa and the entire world. We have in the UK where there is a draft order that now they're seeking to make or prescribe Wagner Group as a terrorist group. We shall be looking at that and much more here on Global Today. I'm joined this morning by Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who is the director of the Horn Institute of Strategic Studies. Also, we're joined this morning by the CEO of Africa Policy Institute. This is Professor Peter Kagwanja. We have also the senior partner of GLOSSIP. This is Professor Noah Midamba, who is a foreign policy and defense expert. And we'll be joined also by Dr. Simeon Sungi, who is a criminal justice professor at the university, or the USIU, that is United States International University, Africa. That will be much later in the course of the program, but I just want to hear their voices so far. If they've been attending also the Climate Summit, they will tell us. Dr. Hassan Kanenje, Professor Peter Kagwanja, Noah Midamba as well. Let's begin with you, Dr. Kanenje.
Good morning, Dibal. It's, of course, yet another Wednesday that we're discussing some issues on security, diplomacy, foreign relations. And, of course, we are starting with one of the biggest events that's taking place on the continent. And happily, it's taking place in Kenya, which is the seat of the United Nations Environmental Program. So it could not have taken place in a better place than Nairobi. Now, I think, last week I think we were discussing someone saying make some noise, yes, because he felt cornered, somewhere in Gabon. But in Nairobi right now we're making some good noise with regard to climate action. And in part because while we are the least contributors to carbon emissions, we suffer the most consequences of them as a result of the ongoing climate change. No one needs reminding the past few years how dry the Horn of Africa region has been. And therefore, I think if we make some noise, but also come up with mechanisms on actually ensuring that we're going to secure some of what we are demanding, is going to be very helpful. So this is the right kind of noise taking place in Nairobi. I'm not so sure the right kind of noise was going to take place in Gabon.
Make some noise. Let's hear from Professor Peter Kagwanja.
Who's been making noise?
Let me start by basically sending my condolences to the family and friends and relatives of Field Marshal Muthoni Kirima, who is one of the top female Mau Mau fighters. Yes. And also the highest ranking of them all in terms of, being a field marshal. Then, of course, she's also one of the longest living, because she died at 93 years, which is really a great, gift from God. But we do appreciate, we do feel that she served this country well, and therefore she deserves our respect. And I think, as they say, old soldiers never die. So Muthoni will be with us. Now, on climate summit, I think this is really a great achievement from the side of the government, particularly President William Ruto, to have managed within that short period he was elected to win that chance to host the meeting here. First, of course, is to draw attention to the world that we as a country are dedicated to the issues of climate preservation. And Nairobi being what it is described as, the only city in the world that is sandwiched between a great forest and a national park, where life is the way it's supposed to be in nature. So basically, landscaping and showing that is great for us. Not to mention the many achievements that come from, people visiting. I am sure 2023 will be a year where we're going to record the greatest number of tourists, so to say. I know we are looking at the issues about climate change, and we are going to look at the depth of them, but from a Kenyan perspective, I think we're going to reap a lot of benefits. Our hotels are booked to capacity. Our game parks and everywhere is booked to capacity. So we have a great week when our economy is basically going to benefit from that. But the debate, and I'm sure we are going to get into the depth of it, is about climate change and so on. But we need to focus the debate on other issues that are more critical. Not that climate change is not critical, but is engendering other change that is likely to disadvantage Africa compared to other parts of the world. The scramble for Africa is now more intense than ever before.
The scramble for Africa,
The scramble for Africa is more intense. The marginalization of Africa in terms of industrialization is going to be intense. If you look at Kenya, we are number one or two in terms of energy production. And, 102 in the world out of 195. When we are talking about being industrialized, how do you industrialize? And now this whole shift about climate, energy shift to clean energy means more investment in new technologies. Have we planned for that? So the debate is about climate action, but the action need to be explored in a deeper sense than we are doing during this summit. For us, because we're coming from the think tanks and others, I think our week starts with Ernest tomorrow, 7th and 8th. Of the civil societies, professionals, and others will have their meetings. I think we will be having ours tomorrow with the Foreign Service Academy and others will be meeting the ISS and so on. The idea is basically to see what those of us in civil society and think tanks, the knowledge-based, institutions are going, non-governmental institutions are going to do about this. What is our emphasis going to be?
All right, thank you. And we shall be looking at that as well when we have the All-Carrier 6, which is touted to be the world's biggest geothermal, of course, capacity generating power plant in the world. And we know Kenya was the first as well when it comes to geothermal, beginning in the 1950s to actually tap the geothermal energy right now. When you talk about the scramble for Africa, is there any flash of interest that also is targeted towards Africa because of this renewable energies reserves? Yep. Wow, they say that in the next 50 years, the North Rift, when you're talking about the Great North Rift and coming down to the south of Mozambique, Africa will be, according to scientists, Africa now it is actually shifting 1 centimeter a year, and the East African bloc will be a separate continent by itself, so to speak, in the next 50 million years. So we need to put our acts together. We'll not be here, but for the sake of posterity as well.
50 million, the ball, it's a long way.
It's a long way to go.
Yeah, so I need to enjoy the time.
You need to make good use of time right now.
By the time is played, my grandchildren will be gone.
But they always say that a good father leaves inheritance
That's right.
for his children and his children's children. Yeah. So it is not just materially,
exactly.
but of course also when it comes to preserving the mother nature, and of course also leaving a good earth that is viable and fruitful for them as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see you want to bash me. There's a bash coming from...
The ball, I concur with my colleagues. This was a very, very important exposure for the country, for Kenya. We started with the conference with GLOSEP, which went very well. I had the opportunity to meet with some very high-ranking people and to just get their mindset in terms of the conference. Then afterwards, what happened and how do we use this conference?
Yes.
The president did exactly what I would expect the president to do. In that he drove a small, tiny car from State House to the center. Unfortunately, his team, the CS and all that, came with gas guzzler. You know, the bigger the better. Maybe the size of Professor here, drive a big car, gas guzzler. And so the issue, the BAL, is what lesson did we learn out of this? Kenyans can no longer take climate change for a joke or for far-reaching 50, 100 years from now. It is happening now. There are going to be two things, in my opinion, the BAL, that is going to impact the world significantly for a while. One is the fallout of the Russian-Ukraine war. And we begin to see the consequence of that, the BRICS and all other noise which is coming out of that. But for the continent of Africa, it's going to be proxy war. We're going to kill each other, but this time with really deadly weapon that come out of as a result of these conflicts. The people, the Kenyan people must understand there's a direct impact on climate change. There is cancer, death, there is blindness of citizens. There's going to be large-scale economic disruption that is going to really impact us seriously. And so we need to begin taking that seriously. Instead of blaming Europeans, blaming Americans, blaming China for pollution, we need to be able to take our responsibility very seriously and demonstrate to the world that we're serious about climate change and conservation. Number of children we have, our settlement, human settlement and habitat and everything. All that need to be done and taken seriously.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's hear from Dr. Professor Simeon Sungi. Has been missing in action. Well, yeah, and you had to pass by the kitchen.
That's right. No, thank you for having me. And I've been missing in action, and good to see you, Prof.
Good to see you,
yes,
my friend.
And the gang, the two my gang members. So, well, I've been away for some time. Now, I think we're talking about the summit. But I think for me, this is it's an exciting time for Africa. I think Africa is taking its place in the international community and showing that it can be a leader in some of these crucial issues. And also, for me, I think there's a demonstration that we have a new breed of leadership in Africa that is able not to be followers but leaders on these crucial issues that have a huge impact for us as a people, as human beings. There's a lot of politics on climate change, who is to blame and all that. But the truth of the matter is that while by we I mean Africans, we have less contributed to the problem, but we are the highly impacted. So the question becomes, what should we do? And of course, we like we said, this has a relationship to development. So what are some of these measures that we need to take in order to also make sure that we develop as a people? So I think the debate is ongoing. It's not complete, but I think for me this is the most exciting time in my lifetime.
Indeed. All right. Of course, those are introductory remarks there from our guest this morning. And we shall be analyzing what is happening as far as climate security is concerned and a raft of other issues as well. But let's see what is fresh off the press this morning. Before you step out of the house, just have a quick cursory look at it. And this is what is on the front page of the Standard this morning. Africa's loud voice. Yesterday we saw messages, powerful messages. Nearly 20 African presidents converge in Nairobi to talk climate change, and they did not disappoint. They are confident of continent's renewable energy potential and want the globe's mega emitters to honor their financial pledges Today, they adopt a declaration deemed to be a game changer, and this will be, of course, forwarded at the COP28 that will be happening at the UAE. And that story is well fleshed out for you on page 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7 of The Standard this morning. Africa has summoned the confidence to confront hard facts, engage truthfully, and forge a common position on critical issues that project a new, bold, and radically transformative voice. This is what President William Ruto said yesterday. Also, the industrial giants are fundamentally unjust. We are here to collaborate, not to capitulate. We seek cooperation, not charity. This is Julius Bio, Sierra Leone President, sentiments that he expressed yesterday. And we have John Kerry, U.S. climate envoy, who also said this problem is a human-made, or is human-made. It's about pollution. It's not complicated. It is clear Africa presents best opportunity to win battle. We have also all we had. It just jumped on the next page. Let me just go back there so that we can get some of the sentiments. We'll run you by some of the sentiments also in our stories this morning. But this is what also Paul Kagame said yesterday during that particular session. Africa continues to carry the burden of rising temperatures. This is unfair, but playing the blame game is not the answer. Playing the blame game is not the answer. This is what Paul Kagame said. Salva Kiir, we must seize opportunity to the African Climate Summit to come up with ways to address climate change impact, amongst others, that we shall be airing just soon, or maybe also you had yesterday. And this is some of the pledges so far that have been made. We have 3.6 trillion shillings, that is $25 billion. Africa Development Bank pledges towards climate finance by 2025. We have 655.2 billion shillings, that is 4.5 billion shillings. That is COP28 President Designate Sultan Al Jaber investment pledge in Africa's clean energy. Also 7.2 billion shillings, first tranche of financing locally led climate action program, where up to 80% flows to counties, that is $49.4 million there. And also we have 15 billion shillings, Safaricom sustainability linked loan jointly with Standard Bank, APSA and KCB. Also you have 436.8 million shillings, that is $3 million among the US, or the amount the US has committed to fund Africa each year for climate loss and damage, also building resilience. We have 130 billion shillings, that is 1 billion euros. That is amount EU committed to the risk private investments, also set to help attract up to 20 billion euros in investment. This is the Africa Green New Deal, and we hope also they'll make good of the promises as the president has implored them. That is what we have on The Standard. Looking at the teaser, freedom fighter Muthoni Kirima takes final bow, and this is what also Peter Kagwanja was expressing his condolences and also deepest sympathy for the family of the field marshal who has bowed. And we have that story on page 10 and 11 of The Standard. Enterprise Magazine comes in handy for you every Wednesday. Africa's startups at a crossroads, and you can follow that story inside The Standard. Kenya miles petrol diesel vehicles ban. Kenya miles petrol diesel vehicles ban. That is on page 17. And AFCON, who has chance to qualify? This is a probing question. You can follow the story on page 32 of The Standard. Ruto, don't kill us with debt, he says. Addressing a global gathering of dignitaries in Nairobi, President William Ruto decries unfair loan agreements with the West, saying this continues to disadvantage and impoverish the continent. And as former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry lauds Ruto's leadership, he blows hot and cold on climate reparations to Africa. You have this story on page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. An insert there of also the delegates following the summit, that is heads of state and other dignitaries follow proceedings yesterday at the Kenyatta International Convention Center in Nairobi during the second day of the Africa Climate Summit 2023. On the sidebar, pay boost, win for acting officials as MP rejects proposals to deny them allowances. Lawmakers describe such a law as unfair labor practice, saying the proposals or the proposal would violate the Constitution and Employment Act. Also, you have traders hit with 81 million shillings fine for evading taxman. You can find out who that is. A businesswoman convicted of 12 counts of failure to file returns and remitting taxes to the Kenya Revenue Authority. And you have that story on page 10 of the Daily Nation. Lawyer makes U-turn, rescinds decision to withdraw Mumia's case. Lawyer had filed a notice to withdraw a liquidation petition against the sugar company, but has changed her mind and is now seeking the court's permission to rescind the withdrawal. You can follow the story on page 10 of the Daily Nation this morning. The Star, keep your promises, Ruto tells rich nations. This is the splash this morning. Investors have pledged to provide 1 trillion shillings to help Africa combat climate change. And this story is on page 4 and 5 of the Star this morning. Only woman Mau Mau Field Marshal remembered Heroine Modoni, who passed on yesterday. And you can follow the story on page 20 of the Star this morning. And also we'll run you by that story. And we have a family photo here. Weighty matter, President William Ruto with Africa heads of state and dignitaries at the second day of the Africa Climate Summit at KICC in Nairobi yesterday. Also, Raila to decide fate of ODM rebels in crucial NEC meeting. They will know their fate today. You could follow that story inside the Star this morning. Also, Kanyotu, son sues mother in battle for 10 billion shillings, 10 billion shilling estate. And heavy rain caused Solai Dam to burst. This is what Mansuk tells the court. Human activity and heavy rains caused Solai Dam to burst 5 years ago, killing 48 people and displacing many others. Court hard, and you can follow the story on page 3 of the Star this morning. Climate leaders speak up for Africa. This is what is on the front page of the People Daily. Africa cannot grow because it is burdened by unfair debt. Heads protest. UN boss Guterres challenges top polluters to take full responsibility, and Kenya signs 3 deals on food security as UAE gives $4.5 billion for clean energy in Africa. You have reports and pictures on page 4, 5, 6, 7, and also commentaries on 10 and 11 of the People Daily, and some of the sentiments also are spread here on the sidebar. I will not read them for the sake of time, but you can grab a copy of the People Daily this morning. Also, how come sugar millers owe 128 billion shillings? MPs now ask. Legislators also want to know why the 5 state-owned farms owe farmers 1.7 billion shillings. Those are probing questions. They need pertinent answers. You have the story on page 14 of the People Daily. And iScans generated 2.5 billion shillings in 2 days. Central Bank boss Thuge says the money was not checked because M-Pesa moves hundreds of billions daily. And this is in 2 days, $2.5 billion, a billion shillings, should say, was actually transacted through the WorldCoin. And you can follow the story on page 3 of the People Daily this morning. Tunataka haki. Viongozi wasema Afrika inadhiriwa zaidi licha ya mataifa ya magharibi kuchafua anga. You can follow the story inside Taifa Leo this morning. And that is on page 2 where it's stacked away. Also, watumishi kutafuna minofu. Wabunge waokoa wale wanaoshikilia nyadhifa kwa zaidi ya miezi 6. Right? The acting CEOs or other director generals as well have also a relief there, where the legislators are saying if they don't get the attendant allowance that comes in with that particular office, then that's unfair and a violation of the Constitution as well. You can follow the story on page 3 of Taifa Leo. Ruto Raila talks power fast business growth in 7 months. That's the upshot and the blowback. Not really the blowback, but the upshot of the bipartisan talks. Uptick in output sales attributed to political stability. Private sector hiring rises at fastest rate in 2 years. And this story continues on page 2 of the Business Daily this morning. And Kenya commits to the green hydrogen plan. President William Ruto can be seen here penning his signature for the implementation of a green hydrogen strategy and roadmap during the Africa Climate Summit at the KICC in Nairobi yesterday. Also, we have related stories there on page 12 and 13 of the People Daily. Distressed SMEs need to, on average, 30,000 shillings capital to reopen. A typical micro, small or medium enterprise in Kenya needs an average of 30,000 shillings capital injection to restart operations after a close down. pointing to the tiny monetary value of venture running at that level. And also, Africa Development Bank launches 145.5 billion shillings funding for African startups. You can read the rest of the details on page 14. Betting firms not out of the woods as far as taxes is concerned. We have it's facing 2 more gambling taxes in new bill. The state is lining up 2 new taxes on betting firms, escalating the onslaught on the multi-billion shilling industry whose growth appears to defy heavy taxation. The Betting Control and Licensing Board has proposed a gambling tax which will be charged at the rate of 15% of betting firms' gross gaming revenue and a further 1% monthly levy on the same revenue. This continues on page 2 of the Business Daily this morning. Let's cross over to Uganda. Depressing news there. Arsenal fan killed after Man United loss. That is what happened in Uganda. Needless death. What reportedly began as a taunt between Uganda's fans over the results now escalated to a death. Arsenal fan killed after Man United loss. That is a splash there. I wonder what Professor Sungi, if Arsenal is your team or Man U.
Unfortunately,
there's this neurosis about football that it's actually it can be a death threat to some of the people who are watching.
I'm not a fan of football that much, but I think for me it's very interesting that in the continent of Africa has very passionate fans of the UK, what is the British League, English League, yeah. And I mean it's fascinating because football is I think one of the biggest game in the world. But for me, the fascination is too much. But I mean, I think when we get to a point where people are murdering others because of being a fan of a football team, I think that's outrageous in my view.
Right, that is the latest development there in Uganda, as you can see, the Daily Monitor. Also, Tanzania, as it says, Tanzania's grand food sustainability strategy is also another story that you want to follow inside the Citizen. And I shall be showing you also what we have on the front page of, oops, something happened there. We need to just remove that. Yeah, on the front page of the New Times and also on the front page of the China Daily. This is the New Times. Africa faces climate crisis, 6 lower interest rates on debt. Rich countries borrow at interest rate of between 1.4%, while it's 14% for poorer countries. This is a climate injustice that they were seeking climate justice here at the summit. Africa should be key player in search for global climate solutions. This is what Kagame said yesterday. It has been captured by also the New Times in Rwanda as well. East African bloc in new push to keep out mitumba imports is a splash in this week's The East African. Uganda, Kenya are taking after Rwanda, which effected the ban, a decision fraught with political and economic repercussions. And the China Daily, humanitarian cause unites the world. This is what Xi says. President praises International Committee of the Red Cross work to promote peace and, of course, progress. And you can follow the story inside the China Daily as well. Also, Ministry, Immunity Law aligns with global practices. And we can see here Chinese expertise. A train arriving at the Marina station on Monday during the inauguration of the commercial operations of the Lagos Blue Line rail in Lagos, Nigeria. The mass rapid transit system is expected to ease traffic congestion in the commercial hub. The project was built by China's civil engineering construction company. And you can read the rest of the details inside the China Daily as well. Africa being transformed with help from BRICS. Many people across the globe are the eyes of the 15th BRICS Summit, which was held from August 22nd to 24th in Johannesburg, South Africa. And you can read the rest of the details of how Africa also is being transformed by the BRICS as well. All that in the China Daily. The Economist, artificial intelligence voted. All right. right, how artificial intelligence will affect the elections of 2024 is what we have on the front page of The Economist, or the cover of The Economist. Paranoid nationalism and corruption, the property price paradox, arms control, Oppenheimer's nightmare, and also Chile, 50 years after the coup. This is how it looks. And also, we have the music Forget Keto, intermittent fasting, and Ozempic. The facts about what works and what doesn't are still elusive. Amongst others, trouble at museum, the case of the missing treasures, that is a week. On page 6, it continues. The artifacts that was stolen as well. You can read the rest of the details on that development. Putin's chef, a death foretold. Agatha Christie reveals all, and you can read all about it also inside the week. Too late, a probing question there, how the Republican alternatives to Trump are trying to open up the race. And as it stands right now, according to the latest polls from the Wall Street Journal, it is Trump and Biden. They are neck to neck as far as the polls are concerned. A very visible matter, that is a controversy still on the Wagner Group, a leader who passed on. And when will Trump go on trial? That is the question as well. And the return of medieval combat, the last word, that is also happening on the week. Okay, let's see what we have also as far as the weather is concerned today, before we buckle down to our discussions and our stories as well, to just set the tone for our conversation this morning. All right, that's how the weather will be today. We want to hack back into history and find out also what really happened in the annals of history as far as politics is concerned. And Newsroom is up next.
I've once been called Minister for Optimism and Constitutional Affairs. I want to claim that title because I am optimistic that for the first time in 20 years, we are going to produce a new constitution. If Kenya dares withdraw from the Rome Statute, and international crimes are proven to have occurred last year, that's why I said stay in Kenya, don't set foot out, even if you are a journalist. My plans are local tribunal, 1. 2, local tribunal. Anybody who wants to guess 3? Local tribunal.
Ni kitu ngumu sana kusema kwamba mtu ambaye ameshtakiwa na maofu kuhusu binadamu anaweza kupatiwa kiti hicho cha kusimamia binadamu. Mimi sijasikia jambo kama hilo.
Hayo ni maoni yake ambayo kikatiba ako na uhuru wa kuwa na maoni kama hayo. Kuna wengi, mimi nikiwemo, ambao niko na maoni tofauti.
Whichever way, my campaign is not built around the ICC. My campaign is built around an agenda which I have and a vision which I have for the country called Kenya.
I consider it the height of impunity to appear to be taking a court of law for granted and to be chest thumping and saying regardless.
I'm also targeting real integrity so that never again should a president and a prime minister or president and another key official be debating as to who should be suspended and who should not be suspended. It ought to be automatic if your name is mentioned adversely in circumstances that suggest there is some prima facie, we call it, some smoke in the matter, you step aside.
Warning any person intimidating the teachers through threats that it is not acceptable and we will not allow it.
And it is over. They must go back to class, I'm sorry. This order must be complied with.
Somebody is earning a huge club of Kenyans, 1 million and above, 2 million, 3 million, and the peanuts of the members of parliament, 850,000, and they call it peanuts. So what we are earning is sim-sim.
The things that divide us are so little compared to the so many things that require that we work together. Why are you dressing a schoolgirl like a nun? What do you have in mind?
All right, remembering Mutula Kilonzo, that was Mutula Kilonzo as the Minister of Justice and also a Minister of Education. Peter Kagwanja, any fond memories of the former minister?
Yes, I worked with the minister very closely when we were doing the Katiba. First at the think tank level, when we were going to Naivasha, he was our chief. And later on, when we came now to run the referendum, the yes side, of which I was the director, and therefore we had 2 good years of interaction. He was also one of the key men in the Kibaki side of the government, to which I was, and therefore I have very fond memories of him. A very, very contented man in terms of, he was very proud of his intellectual achievements, and he kept on reminding many of us that he was a first-class holder. He felt he had a first from the University of Dar es Salaam. He always reminded us that he was the best of the best. But at the same time, he never shied away from controversies, and he spoke his mind freely, without fear. I do remember we had one of the confrontations we had with him. I, as the thinker on the government side, and him as the minister, was the office of the prime minister. Because for me, many of my kind had an idea that we needed one center of power. But Mutula was convinced that we needed both the president and the prime minister. And I remember one morning he came with a proposal to the committee that we should not be worried about the president and the prime minister. What we should be worried about is whether we have a committee that can mediate between them. And he put the proposal of a council of mediation as part of the constitution. And I remember asking, and when this council is mediating between the president and the prime minister, where is the country? Then I have not thought about that. Then we had basically to think about that. Finally, of course, he accepted the system it is, and he defended it. We went to the referendum together, and it was a huge achievement. So if one is really talking about a single legacy of Mutula Kilonzo, apart from having a brilliant son as well to succeed him, because for a man, for a family, that's a huge thing. It is the constitution. The new constitution was born in his hands. The debates and everything that went around, he was the minister for constitution, for justice and constitutional affairs. Therefore, I would attribute this constitution to him. And he really chaperoned the debates very, very well. And as an intellectual, I think he was at home with what we're doing. He was also a very generous person in terms of contributing. Remember, there was a time we had no money to do the campaign, the yes side. And I went to his office and he told me, you know what, as the government is trying to organize itself to get some money from wherever to help you, just organize something at KICC. And we organized an impromptu Harambe to finance the secretariat. Because we thought the yes the no campaign, the Reds, were moving too fast, and we needed to stop them. So he came generously into the party, contributed, and that gave a huge boost to the Yes campaign. So it's not only at the level of policy, but he contributed in material terms to ensure that this constitution, was achieved. So that to me is his legacy.
He sounded a bit pro ICC when we had, Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto running for...
Yes, that was the transition.
For the presidency.
Immediately after the constitution, the next thing that kicked in, remember we are moving from the agenda, the agenda that was captured in what we call the National Accord and Reconciliation Act. And among the things that needed to be achieved was a constitution. The other one was justice relating to the ethnic clashes or that violence, post-election violence. And you cannot rule it out. Of course, a politician is a politician. Mutula was a politician. And if you are a good boxer, you hit where you hit your friend at the heart. So it kept on hitting. And ICC was one of those issues.
All right.
Yeah, that's why you see that kind of a debate there between him and President Uhuru Kenyatta, then Deputy Prime Minister. And it was tough, even for us who were supporting the government. I think we've never had a tougher time than that, because they took the issue of ICC as the issue to knock out certain people from being candidates. But then the same people, I'm talking about William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta, literally pulled a magic by turning the ICC into a referendum issue. And that time, when they turned the referendum, it was not about Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto versus the other. It was actually the country versus the ICC. And that to me was really, it was...
All right.
It was superb.
All right. Still on the news here, we have a picture there, and I wanted just to pick the brains of the historians around here, if they can recognize what was happening here. This is the Supreme Court, and this gentleman was being sentenced to death in 1969. Do you remember who this was?
It's Jenga.
Nahashon Jenga. You're right.
Jenga, who assassinated Tom Mboya.
Yes. Yeah. And this is a picture that by then he was being escorted back to the cells. Nahashon Jenga in 1969.
He doesn't look sad.
He doesn't look. Yeah, he doesn't look sad. He's like a mission accomplished.
Yeah, even the guards. Yeah, the guards are laughing.
The guards are.
They must have said something to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
But did he really die?
Well,
did he really die?
Is this another moon landing question?
Okay. And also we have, if you can recognize this face, maybe you can also know who this was a father to. Right, this is in 1967 on the track, and this is Daniel Rudisha.
Wow.
Yes. 1967.
1967.
The father of the other Rudisha.
The father of David Rudisha.
David Rudisha.
Oh no,
yes.
Yeah.
He's a spitting image of his father.
He's running
look
400
at it.
meters.
Barefoot.
Yeah.
Barefoot, of course.
Yeah.
Kenyans are putting
He won silver.
shoes along those times.
Oh really?
Between and up to 72.
72 years.
Yes.
He won a silver.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
400 meters.
In 1967.
Bare feet.
Yeah.
That was, the grip. Running barefoot, the grip is even more stronger there.
Yeah. Yes.
This is Daniel Rudisha. We celebrate him as well. That was in September, of course, 1967, and Nahashon also was sentenced to jail life death sentence in 1969, just from our archives. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, you know, when we're discussing about police uniforms, now, should we
Police
go back to this?
yes,
you know, the wearing shorts.
Maybe this should be part of it, the Kaptula. With the police uniforms, yeah.
If you went to school where I did,
yes,
and you tell me to go back to Kaptula, that's basically sentencing me. The legs will become so cold. I want Kaptula, so don't talk about it. So let our police be.
All right, that's a bit there from our Annals of History.
Yeah.
Thank you very much from the museum. All right, now the Africa Climate Summit entered day 2 yesterday with leaders pushing for what they call climate justice. The president says that without it, Africa will only remain a leader in climate action by word, but not in deed. According to delegates attending the week-long summit, the implementation of the Loss and Damage Fund will mean support to vulnerable countries and utilization of climate-friendly resources within the continent. Experts say Africa has over 60% energy transition potential, which, once utilized, could change the climate narrative. But what will it take for the industrialized nations to honor the compensation agreement? That's a probing question, and Purity Museo-Nzuki has the answers.
The second day of the African Climate Summit, delegates continued to push for full utilization of Africa's energy potential through massive investments and compensation. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres setting the stage for a debate that seemed to have added salt to an injury that African nations have been trying to nurse.
Reaching these targets requires climate justice. Developed countries must present a clear and credible roadmap to double adaptation finance by 2025 as a first step towards devoting at least half of all climate finance to adaptation. And they must also keep their promise to provide $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate support and fully replenish the Green Climate Fund.
When he took the stage, President William Ruto seemed to hit directly at the industrialized nations when he used the saying that until the lion learned the art of writing, all stories glorified the hunter.
We have been profiled negatively. The continent of disease, war, poverty. But we are stepping forward to say, look here, Africa is the continent with 60% of the world's renewable energy assets. That is why Chinua Achebe told us that until the lion learned the art of writing, all stories glorified the hunter.
Ruto, who addressed the delegation that included over 10 heads of state and government, took the opportunity and challenged his counterparts to aim at going green first before industrialization.
Let those who need the resources get, not those who don't. In the last experience, those who did not need the resources got more than those who needed the resources. We need to have a paradigm shift this time round.
On his part, COP28 President Dr. Sultan Al Jaber said that he was confident that Africa's agenda during the upcoming November conference in UAE will not be ignored this time round.
The World Bank estimates that every dollar spent on climate adaptation brings an average of $4 in benefits. It simply makes sense for Africa to get a fairer share of global climate finance.
This summit is a crucial step to prepare the upcoming COP28 meeting and to make sure that Africa's voice resonates around the world and that Africa's priorities as a continent that is most affected by climate change are duly taken on board. Today, I'm here not only to listen to you, but also to bring Europe's offer to be your ally at COP28.
The deliberations come to a close on Wednesday, with delegates aiming to find common climate global solutions. Purity Museo-Nzuki, KTN News.
From talking the walk to walking the talk, the United States, the European Union and the Africa Development Bank are among countries and institutions that have pledged to assist African countries with billions of money to adapt to the adverse effect of climate change. This follows an uproar by African countries that most of the Western countries largely responsible for climate change have done little so far in financing climate change adaptation in Africa, where the climate crisis is directly and adversely felt. KTN's David Modoka has more.
It is on the second day of the Africa Climate Summit that is being held here in Nairobi, where the push by African countries for resources to combat climate change from the West intensified. African countries sustained complaints that they have been left alone to shoulder the climate change burden, despite contributing very little to the crisis, while developed nations, largely responsible, do little to help.
As you are not here to save us.
In response, several Western countries and institutions reveal that they will not just talk the walk, but also walk the climate action talk, especially by offering African countries financial help and funding climate action programs, among them the United States, that pledged to cushion African countries hard hit by climate change with $3 billion, which translates to 437 billion shillings annually.
20 countries produce 80% of all the emissions. Mine is one of them. 20 countries. And it is critical for all of those 20 countries to immediately take steps to get on the path to the Paris Agreement, to align, to have the ability to keep 1.5 degrees alive. That will only happen if those 20 countries take the lead and make it happen.
Others include the European Union that committed to set aside 1 billion euros, that translates to approximately 154 billion Kenyan shillings for private investment into climate change adaptation programs in Africa, and the African Development Bank that promised to avail $25 billion in 2025. At the same time, the Bezos Earth Fund, which belongs to American philanthropist Jeff Bezos, announced that it will pump $22.8 million to 2 restoration programs in Kenya's Rift Valley and at the Lake Kivu and Rusizi River Basin in the DRC, Rwanda and Burundi.
First of all, we fully support the need for multilateral development bank reform. It is time to move from words to action, absolutely.
In our villages, in our towns, and in our cities, all lives must be protected from climate change. We must put the youth and women at the core of climate financing.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres further called upon all developed countries to keep their promise to provide $100 billion each year to developing countries for climate support, as well as to double adaptation finance by 2025.
And here, from a low-emitting continent, Africa, I make a very strong appeal to the large emitters. Assume your responsibilities.
The UN Secretary General further called on African countries to invest in carbon sinks, adding if properly developed, could see the continent become a large superpower. David Muthoka, KTN News, Nairobi.
And still on the talks, African leaders want effects of climate change addressed as matters of urgency, whereas many talked about the need to use a different approach in pushing for financing. Concerns is being raised over continued displacements as they search for food and water for people and animals. Del Soseto also set this into perspective.
Climate change has seen several demographies affected, such that we have climate immigrants that others refer to as climate refugees. From Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and many other countries, many continue to move to survive, a factor that is expected to continue if climate change is not addressed. Amy Pope, the International Organization for Migration Director General-elect, stressed the need for financing.
We know that climate change is going to displace millions of people. Already just this year, 7.5 million people have been displaced in sub-Saharan Africa alone. You fast forward to 2050 and we're looking at another 100 million people who will likely be displaced.
She adds that world leaders and stakeholders must speak in one voice. Some leaders called for inclusion of the private sector in this endeavor.
It's enormously important. We know that climate will force people to move. If they can't farm, if they can't feed their livestock, if they have no home because a storm has destroyed it, people will move. That is normal. It is a typical human adaptation strategy. Now, our goal is to work with governments to start to think proactively. How do we help communities to be more resilient? How do we ensure that people have the skills they need to get the jobs of the future? This requires some forward thinking, it requires creative solutions, and the involvement of an entire society.
Meanwhile, the International Finance Corporation Director for East Africa, Mary Porter, has called for an all-inclusive approach in addressing climate change issues.
I think, Dennis, first off, already you have a lot of companies, investors right here. I saw them last night at the Kenya International Chamber of Commerce. They're brimming with ideas and experiences. I think now the question is, how do you scale? And I think institutions like mine and other development finance institutions need to come in and partner with the entrepreneurs in Africa to complement the efforts that the government is making.
Elsewhere, Food and Agriculture Organization Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Africa, Abebe Haley Gabriel, says smart agriculture is critical for food security. Sentiments shared by Kala Mukavi, FAO representative in Kenya.
This is about adaptation to climate change, in other words. And this is done in a number of ways, starting from making sure that farmers get the right kind of seeds, but also get the means to protect their crops as well as their livestock.
We need this paradigm shift for emergency after emergency. So what is really important is to work very closely with the farmers to build resilience so that they can really sustain to shocks.
The issue of African debt was also captured during talks, many calling for rejigging of the debt by developed nations. For KTN News, I'm Dennis Aseto.
And as the Africa Climate Summit comes to an end or a close today, health experts are warning that the outcome of the talks could be futile if health is not factored in the climate debate. They also noted that emerging diseases were not included as part of the agenda in the Nairobi talks. Gloria Mulimo has more.
Health experts have warned that the nexus between climate change and health cannot be ignored. This comes following allegations that the health agenda was not included in the climate summit. The stakeholders led by the Africa CDC say 23% of global diseases are attributed to climate change. This percentage, they add, is even higher in the sub-Saharan region at 29%.
Bringing the health discussion onto the agenda of the climate change platform is essential for Africa for two reasons. One is the burden of climate-related health impact is largely felt in Africa. And the second reason is we as a continent are facing much higher risks when it comes to agricultural disruption and therefore food security.
He also emphasized the need for health funding. And now, for Africa to effectively tackle these challenges that continue to pose a threat to its health systems, experts recommend the need for a One Health approach to counter the impact of climate change on human, animals, and environmental health.
It's cost effective, is intervention effective, and most importantly, is community and people-centric.
For a long time, the three sectors are working in silos. So bringing them together to work synergistically is a challenge, and we are working on that as Africa CDC. Second is financing. There are good ideas in all three different sectors, but there is no funding that comes with, well, the funding is not adequate to be able to address the good ideas that have been developed by the three sectors together.
Even so, Whereas data plays a critical role in early detection of disease outbreaks and helps inform policies that help stop diseases in their tracks, most African countries still struggle with data collection, among other challenges the stakeholders say must be addressed to ensure a unified approach to tackle these emerging and existing threats.
I think data is quite important to inform policy preparedness and planning, in the sense that when we can predict using this methodological data, we can do things like ensure that we have sufficient resources, thinking about things like vaccines. We have a good amount of stockpiling, for example, but in the human health population as well as in the animal health population.
As African leaders prepare to give their stand regarding climate change through the Nairobi Declaration based on their 3-day deliberations, it remains to be seen whether the outcome of these talks will factor in health as part of what will be presented in the COP28 conference in Dubai later this year. Gloria Milimu, KTN News.
All right, and that story by Gloria takes us to a short break. We circle back with our discussion here on climate and security, as it were. And also we shall be looking at the latest development.